What if the most meaningful part of your next vacation wasn't the resort, the food, or the excursions, but reading with a child in a classroom? Today's guest has spent 30 years crossing the line between tourist and traveler. Aileen Hale has been awarded 2 separate Fulbright grants in Colombia and another one in Belize. She holds a doctorate in international education and has built a career helping people travel in a way that actually changes them. She's also the host of the Travel with Purpose podcast, where she interviews nonprofits doing meaningful work around the world. In this conversation, we will talk about what it really means to give back when you travel, how she's built a consulting company that designs service trips for families and groups, and what 30 years of working in other countries has taught her about human connections. I'm Gabriela Jimenez, a journalist and the community manager of the Fulbrighter platform, an exclusive network connecting Fulbright alumni and grantees worldwide. If you're a current grantee or alumni, head to fulbrighternetwork.com to create your account. And if you're thinking about applying for a Fulbright award, keep listening. This episode might just convince you to do so. Hi, Aileen. It is a pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you, Gabriela. That was such a beautiful introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you. Great to be here today.
Thank you. We appreciate it. So, first of all, I understand you have been a Fulbrighter in both Colombia and Belize. And I always ask these questions because I think it's always really interesting to hear a little bit about how you found out about Fulbright. So, when did you first hear about the program?
Yeah, great question. I'm trying to remember. I do remember. Actually, it was when I was teaching at Boise State University, and gosh, I bet it was back in 2008 or something that I first heard about it. I went to a lecture on campus, and a colleague who had served in Fulbright talked to us about his experience. And as I recall, my gosh, this was years ago. I think he was in Brazil. Anyway, he told us all about it and how amazing it was. And of course, it piqued my interest. I was working full time at the university as a faculty member at that time and raising my children, so I wasn't able to consider applying. But over the years, I subsequently did apply in 2012 for the Fulbright Specialist Project, which I received to work at the University of Belize did the project for 2013 to 2014, doing teacher training at the University of Belize, and it was amazing. So it was through colleagues and connections.
So, that was your first experience with the program in Belize. And can you tell us a little bit about what you were researching while you were on this grant and why you chose Belize for your research?
Yes, I had another colleague who had also been working in Belize. And actually, more than research, I was doing teacher training at the University of Belize with faculty who were in education. And I was focusing on methods of teaching English as a foreign language. As people may know, English is the national and official language of Belize. However, everybody speaks everything but English as their first language. I say that because there are a number of other languages that are spoken in Belize. It's a very multicultural country with Mayan dialects, Garifuna, Creole, and Spanish as the predominant languages spoken across the country. And so the teachers most often have English as their second language as well. So I focused on some methodology for teaching English as a second language with the faculty.
Amazing. And so, you also had 2 separate Fulbright awards in Colombia, right? Is that correct?
Yes, I did. One was a specialist project and one was the scholar project at the University of Cartagena. Was called UTB. It's a longer name, but it was in Cartagena, Colombia, and the specialist project in Bogota.
And is there, I want to understand a little bit of what you were researching as well in those 2 grants, but also why Colombia as well, if there was a particular reason.
Yeah, great question. I love speaking Spanish and working with Spanish speakers. I first learned Spanish after having studied French my whole life. I switched to Spanish in my early 20s And I did a project through Georgetown University in Quito, Ecuador. That's where I first learned Spanish. And I've always loved the language, the people, the cultures of Latin America. So for those who may not know, you can usually specify or put a preference, if you will, of the regions of the countries or global regions of the world you might want to work in. So yes, I chose to work in South America. That was my choice, and I was awarded that opportunity. Um, Bogota was a different project where I was working on a project with SENA, which is a national organization in Colombia, and they were doing a whole project it's called modularization. It's a hard word, putting their curriculum into modules. So as a curriculum focused project, that was an intensive month-long project where I stayed in Bogota for a month and helped them with the modularization of their curriculum for a national institution. And then when I worked as a Fulbright scholar in Cartagena, I was working at the University Tecnológica de Bolívar, which is a national university in the Cartagena area. And again, I was focused on teacher training for the methods of teaching English as a foreign language.
Amazing. So I see that you have so much experience in English teaching. I was looking at your resume, and it seems like you've really developed, strategies and on how best to teach English as a second language. So we have a lot of ETAs who might be listening to us, English teaching assistants, and I was wondering if you have any quick tips to offer on what the best strategies might be to teach English as a second language. Obviously, I know that it's probably very complicated to summarize everything, but perhaps from everything that you've encountered in your research, maybe you can give, a few quick tips, or, offer some recommendations for people who are just starting on their journey of English teaching abroad.
Yeah, great question. I actually have had the opportunity to work with ETAs in different countries. One was did a seminar with them, a workshop when I was working in South Korea. So I highly encourage anyone out there who's listening or even considering applying to be an ETA, an English teaching assistant, definitely apply. It's a wonderful experience. And I would highly recommend getting some training before you go, because a lot of teaching assistants get awarded the opportunity to serve as a Fulbright in another country without having necessarily gotten training ahead of time. And I say, I understand the reasons why, but as an outsider, I would recommend you could do an online course on your own. They have a lot of online TESOL certificate programs now that are readily available and don't take a whole lot of time. I mean, they're self-paced. So I would highly recommend doing that. It gives you just some fundamentals that will really help equip you before going to another country. As you might imagine, there's a lot of things you have to learn when you're in another country, including language, hopefully, and the cultures and that kind of thing. So if you already have some things under your belt as in terms of teacher training on your own beforehand, it'll really help equip you to succeed and feel competent in your role as a teaching assistant. From what I've seen, also, a lot of times you're given a role as a lead teacher, and so you need to know how to lead a classroom. They often give that opportunity to teaching assistants to have their own class time, sometimes with another professor or another educator, or sometimes on your own. So the more you can equip yourself before going, the better. And I'd be happy to have anybody reach out to me if you're listening to this podcast. I've developed some online modules that I'd be more than happy to share with you, because there's a lot of tech quick techniques that I'd be happy to share with you, uh, like sheltered instruction and total physical response, and some basic things that you can learn quickly, but that'll really help you succeed.
Amazing. And we can probably add a link to those documents if you have them somewhere, and we'll add it to the description of this episode later on. And I think, that's great advice because, like you said, I think nowadays there's so much online that you can kind of, self learn and just feel more confident, right? When you get to that experience, you already have the confidence, and I think that goes a long way. So I was looking at some of the things that you've said previously, and I there was something that really stuck with me because you've said that you've approached your Fulbright experiences as a way to go beyond your university duties, to find ways to have an impact in local communities as well, right? So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that. When did you realize that you could also kind of add that factor into your research and make sure that your experience went beyond, just the regular university duties?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to think about that. When I was first working in Belize, I was afforded the opportunity, which is amazing, to go and visit schools across the country. I was based in Belmopan, which is the capital of Belize, and that's on the mainland. It's about an hour and a half from Belize City, but I was able to travel from the north to the south of the country, visiting schools across the country. So it gave me a lot of perspective. Different regions of the country have different languages spoken. In other words, the parts of the country that are close to Guatemala and Mexico have a lot more Spanish speakers, and the parts of the country, again, closest to Guatemala, have some Mayan influence, so the Mayan language is spoken. So I share that because it gave me the opportunity to see inside, if you will, the dynamics in the classroom. And as a result of that, after my Fulbright in Belize, I started a program where I was taking university students to Belize to work in the schools. So I guess summary of that would be, wherever you are, if you're an ETA or another fellow Fulbright, if you're not already given the opportunity, I would say seek out opportunities to go into the community and explore more than you might just per se at the university, because I think you see a lot more. And I mean, the university is amazing, of course. But when you see the schools, for example, in education, it helps you have a lot more insight into what the teachers at the university level, the faculty, need to learn based on what's happening at an elementary school level, for example. So it equips you to be better even at your profession if you're doing teacher training in this situation. Um, I've always loved engaging in the community. When I was doing my Scholar Award in Cartagena, I had already started my podcast called Travel with Purpose, and my podcast focuses on interviewing nonprofits in other countries while I'm working in other countries. So it kind of was natural that I started learning about nonprofits while I was in Colombia. And so one thing led to another. And I ended up interviewing, I don't know, over 15 different nonprofits in the country. And it was amazing because it gave me, again, insights into parts of the country and communities that I would not have learned about if I had just only worked at the university. Though there's a lot to learn right in and of itself, but it gave me a deeper understanding of a lot of different social challenges across the country and how I could help support in other ways.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the wonders of the Fulbright program is that it gives people the opportunity to go beyond the research and really connect with folks on the ground and really understand, the local struggles. And I think that's, really, really important when we're talking about, exchange and exchange of knowledge and everything. So I appreciate you telling us a little bit about the way that you have experienced your grants. And I wanted to go back a little bit to your career and how you focused on the field of international education. So I understand you have decades of experience. And I wanted to understand a little bit, the timeline. So how did you end up focusing on this? Like, was it something that was naturally coming to you, or did you start, in another field and ended up, moving towards that? Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey in international education?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, when I actually learned French since a young child. I don't know why or how. My parents put me in French classes when I was like 6 years old, and I grew up in the Bay Area in California. And honestly, I just kept learning French all my life. I did it through junior high, high school, and when I got to university, I went to Cornell University and decided to do a semester abroad in Strasbourg, France, and that kind of turned a light on for me in a new way that I hadn't anticipated in several different levels. One, I realized how much French I didn't know because even though I'd studied French all my life, as most of us know in the United States, um, we're not necessarily learning communicative competence. Let's put it that way. I think this happens all over the world. We learn a lot of grammar, and you feel like you can, read and write and those kind of things in the language, but to get comfortable with conversational fluency is a whole nother and a whole other thing to gain, to acquire the language where you really feel competent at it. And I had that experience when I, got to France and was living with the host family and realized, wow, I really need to work on how to communicate and feel comfortable and confident fluently speaking French. But after that experience, I fell in love with the whole process of learning languages and cultures and how much it opens your world to other ways of thinking, other ways of seeing the world, seeing the United States from the outside. I don't know, it just opened so many doors for me as well. I had an opportunity to do an internship at the United Nations in Strasbourg and learn about interpreting work, which I, again, hadn't ever, thought about or doing interpreting. And I just would sit there with my headphones on, learning about interpreting and thought, wow, that's so fascinating how people do that. Later, a few years later, I actually got a certification to get to certify in interpreting for Spanish through Monterey Institute in California. So, one thing leads to another. After I graduated from Cornell, my undergrad was in political science and international relations. I worked in Washington, D.C. for a year at a nonprofit, but quickly found out I was not cut out for the 9 to 5 office job. And so I applied to Georgetown University, had a 6-week intensive program in Quito, Ecuador. And I really realized the Spanish was a language that I'd like to learn to work in the United States, especially even being from California. There's obviously a lot more Spanish speakers and French speakers in California. So I took the opportunity. I took a leave of absence from my work in DC to do this 6-week immersion program through Georgetown University in Quito, Ecuador. But lo and behold, I fell in love with the language and the culture, and I decided not to return to DC and to stay in Ecuador. So I stayed there for 6 months, and I was offered an opportunity to teach English. Given at that time, I didn't have any teacher training. I never planned to be a teacher of English per se. But the opportunity fell into my lap. It was kind of a long-term, like, substitute opportunity at the University of Quito that opened up, and because I was a native speaker, they asked me. So it's almost like an ETA. I was in my early 20s, and I just had the opportunity to step into a position. And again, the lights turned on, and I really realized how much I love teaching. And so I came back to the United States and got certified to teach English as a second language, learned a lot of the techniques for being hopefully a good teacher of language. And from there, went on to get a master's in cross-cultural studies, taught in Indonesia for a year, came back to the United States. Long weaving story, but I decided to pursue a doctorate degree in international education. It was offered to the University of San Francisco. So I came back to my roots in California, and it just felt like it was a degree that combined my passion for working internationally and education. And I knew I loved teaching at the university level. And as most of us know, to be a faculty member, you really have to have a doctorate degree to get, a full-time position. So that's what led me to pursue the international education degree at University of San Francisco. which is another story about a fabulous opportunity.
Wow, that's like a long path. That kind of, it feels like, life was kind of weaving, like you said, this path for you until you got to where you got to. And then, you had your doctor's degree, you studied, like you said, the techniques and all of that. And apart from that, I think from what you're describing, you had a lot of experience as well abroad and kind of understanding locally what works and what doesn't work, right? Because sometimes maybe the technique may apply to a certain community, but it won't work as well with another community. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the methodologies you've come up with over the years, for English teaching. How do you even start to craft something like this, right? Where do you, so maybe you can describe, the first time you sat down and you were like, okay, I'm going to try and create something here. What was kind of behind, that driving that process. And yeah, just tell us a little bit more about the work you've developed when it comes to helping people learn English in an easier way or more organic way.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it originates from having learned other languages myself. And again, that's something I would highly recommend for anybody out there who's considering a Fulbright, whether an ETA or faculty position. If you haven't already had the experience of learning another language in another country, I'm saying trying to really acquire proficiency in the language, you gain a much deeper understanding and appreciation for what it takes to learn another language. And I myself am a very experiential learner. So I teach like I've learned where I felt like I've been able to successfully acquire languages is through experiencing the language. Like I learned Spanish after French, very like on the ground in the field, so to speak, and much less I had a basis in the classroom for 6 weeks, like an intensive course, but really where I gained my fluency was in the community with the people. But when I was engaged in the community while working there. So first and foremost, I would say engage in a community to learn, but techniques that I have studied and practiced that are, I say, tried and true that have been around for, I don't know, hundreds of years. One is called TPR or total physical response. It's the kind of theory behind it is that we all have different learning styles. We have the audio, kinesthetic, visual, different types of learning, and most of us are a myriad of these learning styles. You're not just a visual learner or you're not just an audio learner, but you're a combination, right? But so I try to assess my students and get a sense of what kinds of learners they are. And I try to always incorporate as many learning styles as I can. So if you think about the senses, you touch, feel, taste, hear, see, all your senses, think of incorporating all the senses into teaching. And that may sound funny, but it goes back to the TPR, total physical response. So when I'm teaching something, you get your students to touch it, feel it, experience it. So I mean, I've done examples when I was doing it actually in ETA teacher training. I was giving an example in Romanian, another language that I've learned some of. And I was teaching them sweet and sour, those words. So I would bring in candy that was sweet and sour. Because if you think about, the word sour, how do you teach what sour means? So I bring in something that's very tangible and let people taste it. And then automatically it clicks. So bring in something spicy. If you're trying to teach the word spicy, you bring in something that's in Espanol, is it picante. But again, if you're teaching a new word, you try to bring, we'll call it realia, which is like tangible items that will demonstrate what you're teaching. So as much as I can, I always use as much realia, visuals, hands-on things. I get my students up and moving in class. I try not to have them sitting. Obviously, there's times to take notes and all that. But think about how children learn. And, children learn through music and song, like the hokey pokey and put your right hand in, put your right hand out. They're doing what they're learning. And people always say that children learn so easily. And when you're an adult, it's much harder to learn language. I kind of push back on that theory because I think it's the method that helps you learn, and anybody can learn a language at any age. And I can say that as testimonial because I've learned languages in my 50s that I never dreamt I would have learned. I've learned some Albanian, and I had no basis in Albanian, and it's not connected with any other language that I've ever studied. But again, it's how you learn the language and how your teacher helps you learn the language. So, one other thing I wanted to mention when I was in Albania, speaking of Albania, I was really, really impressed with how fluent their English was. And because I've had the opportunity to teach in many different countries, it really struck me that their English fluency was kind of above and beyond people I had worked with in other countries around the world. And I was asking myself, like, why do they have such fluency? And for those of you who don't know, Albania was under a pretty severe dictatorship for many years, so people could not leave the country to learn English. And so that, adds to many people go abroad to learn a language. But the fact that most Albanians had never had the opportunity to go outside of their country, even to a European country, to learn English, again, made me ask how and why could they become so. I mean, they have natural intonation, natural uh, fluency with their pronunciation. And the numbers, I started asking people, like, how did you gain such fluency? And the number one answer was music and watching TV or like sitcoms and movies in English with subtitles. So I try to incorporate that into my teaching. That's another like technique. I try to bring in a lot of music. There's often songs that I just did this last night with a group I'm working with in Belize. There's a song called Lemon Tree by Fool's Garden that uses the ing tense of the verb. I find songs that have grammatical parts of them. And the beauty of music, there's a lot of rhyme and intonation that people learn subconsciously. And they pick up on the lyrics and the song and the chorus, again, at a subconscious level, so you don't have to actively teach it. And then I take a chorus and I actually have the students learn a chorus of a song that has a grammatical aspect to it, and then I have them create their own lyrics. So a quick example is in this song, The Lemon Tree, I'm turning, 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 turning around. So, we learn that refrain, and then I say, okay, everybody has to pick a new verb and make your own lyric out of it. So they say, I'm waving, 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 waving at you, or I'm singing, singing, singing a song, whatever it is. But it's getting them to take ownership and have more creativity for their learning. So they have to think of a new verb and they have to act it out for the other students. And again, that total physical response is getting them to act. And there's a lot of research behind both how music really helps and stimulates different parts of the brain to learn and remember, and how physically moving as part of learning also helps with language retention. So that's a long answer to a quick your question.
But I think that's a great answer because it really does give people like practical creative ways that they can incorporate into their teaching. And I can attest to the efficiency of music in learning English as a second language myself. It was definitely a part of my process and it was incredibly helpful to me. So I love that answer. Thank you so much. But apart from teaching, I know that one of your main interests seems to be in traveling and seeing the world, discovering the world. So, do you know how many countries you've been to? Do you count?
I was counting at one point. I want to say over 30. I'd have to go back. I heard there's this map of the world you can put on your phone and you can keep track. I need to do that. But I'll let you know when I get my final number.
Yes. What about the languages? Because you mentioned Albanian, and you mentioned Romanian as well. Those are not very common languages for people to learn as adults. So, how many languages do you speak?
Fluently, I speak I speak Spanish, but I spoke French pretty fluently before. I just haven't kept it up, but I can go back to it pretty easily. I again speak some Romanian. I can't say a very, very novice level of Albanian, but I learned some basics. And I did speak some Indonesian. I lived in Indonesia for a year. That was again back in my 20s. I'm older now, but I still remember some of my Indonesian. I was comfortable speaking Indonesian at the time when I was living and working there for a year. But that's it for now. I've also studied a little Portuguese. Um pouquinho português.
Wow, that's amazing. And they're all so different, right? I think they're all so different from each other. So it's not like you kind of went, because if you speak Spanish, then it's easier, I guess, to learn Italian and Portuguese and Latin. But we're talking about, Bahasa, which I think is the language spoken in Indonesia, right? And then Albanian. So I think that's really interesting. And it kind of goes to show, as you were saying, that, it's possible to learn a language even if you're an adult, and that there are techniques that can support you with that. Um, so, kind of following that path, I understand you've created a consulting company, which supports people who want to travel, but also want to volunteer their time and knowledge in benefit of local communities, right? So, can you tell us a little bit more about that? And also, when did the idea first come to you? When did you realize, oh, hang on a minute, I can kind of help as well connect people interested in supporting the communities with the actual communities. Can you talk us through that process of creating this consulting company?
Yes, I started when I went back to when I started taking groups of students to Belize after I had the wonderful opportunity with Fulbright to work as a specialist at the university. I came back to Boise State University where I was teaching, and a colleague was taking student groups to Belize and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this with me?" We were in different fields. He was in the Department of Engineering, and I was in the College of Education. But we decided to do a multidisciplinary course taking students to Belize during like the winter break or spring break. And we actually did a whole course around it called Global Service and Social Responsibility. So it was more than just, your spring break trip, so to speak. It was like a semester long course where we would teach them about the meaning of working in other countries, and are we really serving, or are we doing there's an article, "Are you doing more harm than helping in other countries?" Because there's a anyway, that's another story, but there's, challenges to realize how much you're contributing to the country. And so anyway, that's a long story about after I started taking student groups, I started my own business called Global Service Partnerships. And a friend of mine and she was a graduate student. We just launched this business to take college students and high school students. My children were in high school at the time. And we decided it was really something that was meaningful to be able to expose young people to the opportunity to work in other countries. And that's when we were doing literacy projects in the schools in Belize. From there, I ended up, well, obviously, COVID came in 2020. I had worked as an English language fellow, which is another program through the English language programs in Albania. When I came back from Albania, I was in Florida, landed in Florida, and thought, what am I going to do now? Because all the universities were shutting down their international programs. And I thought, well, gee, what do I do? How do I pivot here, right? So a colleague who I knew through the English language programs and also through the Fulbright community, we decided to start a podcast called Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers, because we realized that when everything was shutting down, that there was going to be no professional development for a while. I'm talking about, being able to travel even in your own country to conferences and that kind of thing. So long story short, I had started my own company back in 2016, but it was kind of a holding place while I was still working in other countries. And I expanded it more as we developed the teaching tips for English language teachers as a podcast. And eventually, thankfully, when COVID subsided, I decided to start my own podcast called Travel with Purpose. And my podcast is focused on interviewing nonprofits to bring support alongside and bring awareness to the nonprofits and what they're doing in communities. So again, after COVID, I started thinking about how I could share my experience with more people. So it was through the podcast and also thinking, okay, years later, I'm not taking student groups anymore. I'm kind of at a different phase of my life, but how could I offer this for women my age, for example? And a lot of women in their 50s in that age group, maybe their children have already left for college or graduated college and have this new space in life that they want to do something meaningful. So I decided to start taking people my age to do service projects in other countries, but combine it with, enjoy a vacation, but realize there's something more to the place behind the scenes where you're having a beautiful vacation. For example, in Belize, it's the second best reef in the world. There's amazing snorkeling and scuba diving. Many people come here for that. And there's places inland for the Mayan ruins and all that. But there's a lot of need in the community. So I've always been passionate about sharing with people the other side, so to speak, or what I say is behind the scenes of the people that work in these resorts. How do they live in the community? And how can we be a source of support to people in the community? So I really try to plug in. I'm in a local Rotary Club and on the island of Ambergee Key. And we're helping a lot with education on the island because a lot of kids drop out of high school even because they need to work to support their kids. And there's a shortage of classroom space on the island for people to even go to high school. There's no university on the island. So there's all these things that people don't think about if you just come here for a vacation. You have to go to the mainland for university. It's very expensive and cost prohibitive. So most students don't end up going to university. So they're now working on starting vocational schools on the islands, vocational programs. So that's what I've become passionate about is how to, and what I do with my business. I set up programs for people to either bring your own group if you're interested and you just don't know where to start because I'm connected with a lot of nonprofits in different countries. I help facilitate collaborations with a nonprofit. You can volunteer for an afternoon, for a day, for a couple afternoons, whatever you want to fit in with your agenda, if you will, for your vacation. Because I feel like you can combine those things and make it that much more meaningful while you travel. And like I said, have a beautiful vacation with your family. I've sent a number of families to Belize and even to Cuba and other countries where they can serve in the community as well as see the beauty of the country. So that answers your question.
I love that. Yes, I think that's a fantastic idea. I really love it. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the whole project as well is that it's called Travel with Purpose. And I think that's a fantastic name. I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but I do want to give you the opportunity to talk to us about what do you think that means? What traveling with purpose means to you? What do you think that is?
Yes, again, just to reiterate, I think it's contributing to a community when you travel and making your travel, I would say, more meaningful. Not to say it's not meaningful to have a beautiful vacation, but I feel like the majority, I would say around not 100% of the people that I've either sent or taken to another country and engaged in the community to do some type of community service or some engagement in the community, that's what they remember. That's what they take back home. You can sit in the sun at a beautiful luxury resort. You can, do all the vacation excursions, which are wonderful and also very memorable. But it gives you a chance to build relationships with people in the community. And those relationships are what often really stick with you when you go back home and you remember, oh my gosh, I was able to read with a child in this classroom and it showed me so much more of the realities of a school in another country that doesn't have air conditioning, that doesn't have running water or but all these things. It gives you perspective and appreciation for what we have in the United States, I will say. Um, But again, how you can contribute and make a difference as part of your journeys while you're seeing the world. And I just think it's enriching for you and for the people, and empowers them, and enables you to see what you can give back while you're traveling.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where everybody wins, right? When you can travel and enjoy your vacation, but you can also support somebody and you can learn from them. You can also leave something behind. I think that's really empowering, and it really speaks to the soul of the Fulbright program as well. How do you pick the organizations or and the people that you feature on your podcast? So, who are I know you mentioned you talk to nonprofits, but is there like what are you looking for in your guests? Like what kind of work are they doing, or how do you find the people you want to feature in your podcast?
Yeah, great question. It's kind of organic, to be very honest, and it they come to me now. And I started, I guess, obviously because I'm an educator, I look for nonprofits that are focused on education, because I also really believe. I had an interesting conversation with people that were in the Peace Corps last night, and we were talking about what really makes a difference in the world to help people get out of poverty. I've helped with a nonprofit called Adelante, which is working in Honduras, offering microloans to some of the most impoverished communities. And I believe microloans is a fabulous way to make a difference in the community, as well as education. They do educational literacy. So I believe highly that education makes a huge difference. So I seek out organizations that have educational programs as part of their nonprofit, which many do. And it's like I said, it kind of things come to me organically, word of mouth. Somebody hears about what I'm doing, and then, "Have you heard about this nonprofit?" Even being based in Jacksonville, Florida, there's a church that supports a lot of nonprofits, so there's people that recommend to me, "Do you know about so and so in Nicaragua? Do you know about so and so's work in El Salvador?" And so I follow up, and I'm proactive. I always look for nonprofits that are working in countries that I'm traveling to. So I'll do Google searches and search for a nonprofit. I also find nonprofits that are helping for sustainability examples, and because I love the ocean and I love the reef and the marine life. There's a number of organizations that I've interviewed in Colombia and Belize that are supporting reef restoration and preservation of the reef and the marine life, so and that education. So and in Honduras, I've interviewed nonprofits in that realm as well. And I'm going on a trip, taking a group for anybody listening out there. We're going to Dominica in June, which is a country in the Caribbean. And I researched what nonprofits are there, 'cause I was asked to do the service part of the trip. I'm collaborating with a colleague who is a master diver, so we're doing a diving and service trip. So I researched nonprofits there, and again found two nonprofits just by a Google search. And it's amazing what you learn about the country that you didn't know ahead of, before. That's why I love doing it. And they're educationally based, focusing on children that have lost everything through hurricanes in the Caribbean countries. As many of you might know, they're hit pretty hard with hurricanes, and it devastates countries and communities. And one of these nonprofits, for example, focuses on the trauma that children go through and how to help with art therapy to help the children recover from losing everything in a hurricane. Imagine losing your home, imagine losing your school, and having to start over. The parents are coping, but what about how the children cope with having a loss like that? So, anyway, to answer your question, it happens organically, and one leads to another, one leads to another. But that's what I'm passionate about doing it, because it just keeps going. I find one, and then I find another, and then somebody comes to me, and I learn so much along the way.
So, from all of these conversations, I wonder if you have an answer to my next question, which is, when it comes to the travel industry, right? It's become increasingly difficult to know how to be a good tourist, right? And I often wonder myself, I travel quite a lot as well. And is there such a thing? Do you think, is there such a thing as a good tourist? So, I guess, how can regular people travel in a responsible way, even if maybe they're not necessarily interested in service or volunteering or don't have the time for it or the capacity, but they still want to be socially conscious, about their impact. They still want to make sure that it's, something uh, that they're not creating a problem or worsening a situation. So, what do you have to say about that idea of like how can somebody be a good tourist without necessarily having, to volunteer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say educate yourself before you go to the country you're planning to go to or the community you're planning to go to, because the more you learn, the more you'll be sensitive to the needs of the country, to the people of the country who are serving you. Because most of us, if you're going to a hotel or a resort or anything like that, there's going to be naturally people taking care of you and serving you in another country. So if you can educate yourself, I mean, the example in Belize, is a very multicultural country, and to know where the people are coming from that are working in the hotels, on the dive boats, on the snorkeling excursions, where are they from? What's their background? There's a lot you can learn about ahead of time. So I would say educate yourself, read about the countries you're going to, talk to other travelers to learn their highlights, what they recommend. Even people that I met in Florida, and I've been coming to Belize for years, they told me about an amazing guide here in Belize who I didn't know. And so build connections with friends, family that have already been to the country. They can give you local tips, leads, places to eat and stay. But bottom line, educate yourself. And if you can learn some of the language before you go, that's even better too. It just shows a sensitivity and that you're interested in learning from them and hopefully contributing a little bit to their country and showing some interest of learning and being a way to give back and being a human, a human that exchanges knowledge and education.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, have an open heart, an open mind, and really try to build an interest into the people that you're meeting and understanding their culture. I think that goes a long way. So, we had several Fulbright Awards currently open all over the world for US citizens. And, you've been on three Fulbright Awards. And I was wondering if you have any advice for somebody who's considering applying for a Fulbright grant, but maybe they think, that's not for them. They're not I don't know, they're not Fulbright material. What would be your advice for people who are considering applying?
100% apply. Don't don't hesitate. It's a fabulous, life-changing opportunity that opens doors for the rest of your life, that builds connections globally, builds friendships globally. Just apply. Even if I had a niece who's highly educated, highly motivated, involved in so many things, she applied and she didn't get accepted, and I told her, "Don't take that as a no, apply again." It is competitive, and they can be challenging to receive depending on the type of grant you might apply for or award. I myself got turned down. I made the final, there's different cuts, as you will say. You get into a final pool, and then the final applicant gets selected. I had a time that I was a runner-up, and I didn't make the final selection to work in Costa Rica, and I was disappointed, of course. But you know what? They told me it's not it's like when you apply to university or anything else. There's always gonna be people that are more qualified, and it's not necessarily always about your qualifications. It's about the needs of the country and the opportunities at a given point in time. So don't be disillusioned that you'll never get a Fulbright. If you get rejected, if you don't get it awarded the first time, try again. There's always another chance. And I tried again after Costa Rica, and then I got into Colombia to work in Colombia. So don't give up. Even if you don't get it the first time, try again. It's a fabulous opportunity, as I said, and I would highly, highly recommend. And it talks to Fulbrighters like myself, alumni, to get tips on your application. most of us alumni would be more than happy to talk with you and encourage you and help guide you in the process. It is a rigorous process, but I highly recommend you go for it. It's a transformative experience.
Amazing. I think that's usually the answer we get is apply, right? And I think you made a good point to like not only apply but also be prepared to try again if you need to because it's worth it. And it's possible, right? It's feasible. It's not out of reach. But you seem like you always have something going on. And I was wondering if you have any future projects you'd like to share or what do you envision for, your next few years ahead? Like what you're working on, what you would like to work on.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm actually currently in Belize right now, and I'm helping start an English program for adults on the island through a local school. It's called Holy Cross, and it's a long story. I won't go into the whole story right now, but it's an Anglican school on the island, and they don't have a program as of yet, but that's why we're initiating this program for adult education because a lot of people immigrate here from the surrounding countries, including El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, the regional countries, and they come here for opportunities. And the parents don't speak English when they come here and they put their children in the schools. So the parents also need English for their careers here. So that's what I'm currently engaged in, working on developing an English program for adults on the island. I am also taking a group to Dominica, again, which I mentioned is a Caribbean island, in June. We still have a few spots left for anybody who's interested. If you're a diver and or a snorkeler, it's a fabulous country to do that, and we're going to support a nonprofit with art education and ocean literacy, helping kids learn about turtles in Dominica. And I'm going to do a trip a year from now in January 2027 in Belize. It's going to combine a catamaran excursion and staying at a resort on an island in Belize, as well as giving back to a school and collaborating with an after-school program while you're here. So it's a unique opportunity to, when you go on the catamaran, you get to go out and explore different islands and paddleboard and kayak and snorkel, again, see the beauty, but also contribute to the country when you come back. We'd love to have you join. That's in January 2027. And June is Dominica of 2026. Anyway, and if you want to go and on another trip in another country and have a group that you want me to support, I'd be more than happy to craft a trip with you. Just message me, and I love designing trips.
So that's really exciting schedule. We will leave Eileen's contact information on the description of this episode, but you can always reach out to her on Fulbrighter. She is there and you can message her directly there. Eileen, it's been really a pleasure talking to you. I love the work that you do, and I really appreciate the time that you have taken to share a little bit with us. We're coming to the end of the interview. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know or anything you'd like to share before we go?
Yeah, one last thing I just thought of. I have helped a number of families. I've crafted trips for families to take their kids to do service in a community, which I think a lot of people really like the idea for their children to get perspective on the world. um, so for those who are interested, I supported a family. I mean, I say supported. What I do is I'm like serve as a consultant, if you will, and I generate an itinerary for you and build connections for you in countries to support whatever you love or passionate about doing. So if you want to go into the caves and go to the Mayan ruins, if you want to go snorkeling, if you want to go diving, one of the families I helped craft a trip for, their son was studying marine biology. So I helped them work at a marine biology station on one of the islands. So I have a number of connections that enable me to craft unique trips for you and your family based on your kids' ages, what they're passionate about, what you're passionate about. So whether it's families or groups of women or couples that want to do a cool trip, you name it, I love crafting it. So just let me know where you want to go, what you're passionate about, and what ways you'd like it to contribute to a country. and I can generate the rest. I'd love to work with you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Eileen. And I wish you the very best on with your consulting company, with your podcast as well. It's called Travel with Purpose. Everybody can also go and look for it. So that's it for us. I will leave all of the information for the contact information for Eileen in the description. I really appreciate everyone's time, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.